Beyond the serene facade of Michigan's forests, its gleaming lakes, and its tranquil communities, there exists a hidden dimension of primeval secrets and unsettling lore. From enigmatic stone rings submerged in deep water to haunted sand dunes sculpted by sorrow, this state is a vessel for more than just scenic splendor. It cradles stories that have been erased, events that defy explanation, and the vestiges of cultures that have long since disappeared. In this exploration of Michigan's age-old enigmas, we will delve into the peculiar, the hallowed, and discover why the past in this place is never truly gone. Concealed within the dense woodlands of the Thumb region, encircled by rustling trees, is a sandstone formation covered in cryptic engravings known as the Sanilac petroglyphs. What might initially appear as basic etchings on rock soon gives rise to a multitude of questions upon closer inspection. Who were the artists? In what era were they created? And most compellingly, what was their purpose? This location, called Ezabigadek Asin in the Anishinaabe language, which translates to written on stone, is held as sacred by the regional Native American tribes, most notably the Ojibwe. The carvings, numbering around 100, are scattered over 1,000-square-foot area of delicate sandstone, displaying symbols that vary from the spiritual to the inscrutable. One can identify human-like forms, fauna, and abstract designs, with each seemingly representing a piece of a far grander narrative. Yet, that narrative is now veiled in mystery, lost to the passage of time, and muffled by the hush of centuries. Let's begin with what is visible. Among the most striking images is the figure known as the bowman, a humanoid shape holding a bowtot, aimed at another symbol. Interpretations range from this being a warrior or hunter to a guardian entity. Some speculate it represents a cosmic struggle where celestial powers clash over the destiny of the world. The figure's dynamic stance and sharp, assured lines suggest the work of a skilled creator, not mere idle scratching. Another captivating image is the spirit being, a large figure with what looks like horns or beams radiating from its head. This carving truly sparks the imagination. Could it be a god, a shaman adorned in ceremonial attire, or something even more mysterious, like a depiction of a non-human being encountered during a ritual or vision? Nearby, symbols resembling turtles, birds, and undulating lines cover the stone, forming a puzzle that awaits solving. However, this is where the investigation becomes complex. There is no precise method for dating petroglyphs of this nature. The sandstone is yielding, and erosion is a relentless force. Most archaeologists propose the carvings are between 300 and 1,000 years old, likely from the late woodland period, though these are merely educated conjectures. Oral traditions from the Ojibwe and Potawatomi speak of ancient forebears using this place for ceremonies long before Europeans arrived, potentially extending the timeline even further back. The spiritual gravity of the site is undeniable. For the Anishinaabe people, these are not simply drawings. They are living teachings, conduits to understanding, carved into the very earth to provide guidance and remembrance. Elders explain that each engraving possesses multiple layers of meaning, often unveiled only through long periods of reflection and study. Unlike modern text, where meaning is direct, these symbols are intended to stir the intuitive faculty of the mind, serving as maps of the spirit, not just the terrain. Naturally, like many sacred indigenous places, the Sanilac petroglyphs have suffered damage. The carvings were first brought to non-native attention following a widespread forest fire in 1881, which burned away the undergrowth that had concealed them for ages. Since that time, the location has been afflicted by weathering, vandalism, and well-intentioned but detrimental preservation attempts. Some of the original figures have faded into obscurity, and there are distressing stories of visitors tracing the carvings with chalk or even blades, hastening their deterioration. Despite this, the petroglyphs endure, some with an air of defiance. The Michigan Department of Natural Resources now jointly manages the site with the Saginaw Chippewa Indian Tribe, a collaboration that has helped restore the spiritual significance of the carvings to the forefront. Traditional ceremonies are once again conducted here. Offerings are left, stories are exchanged, and, perhaps most crucially, the engravings are being reinterpreted not just through the cold analysis of archaeology, but through the warm voice of ancestral memory. Here, the mystery only deepens. Certain researchers posit that the petroglyphs might not be an isolated work, but rather a component of a much wider system of ancient communication spanning the Great Lakes. Similar carvings have been discovered in Ontario, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, consistently near waterways and along native travel corridors or seasonal encampments. It is conceivable that these sites formed a symbolic path that guided people both physically and spiritually across a sacred geography. Others have ventured into more speculative realms. A small but dedicated group of fringe theorists suggest the Sanilac petroglyphs could be the remnants of a lost civilization that predates the Anishinaabe, perhaps even existing before the last glacial period. They cite some of the more abstract symbols as proof of sophisticated knowledge, such as star maps, energy diagrams, or even communication with extraterrestrials. While mainstream science dismisses such claims, it is difficult to stand before that stone and not sense the profound weight of the unknown. And what the carvings are no longer visible. This may be the most haunting aspect. Local lore speaks of other stones that were once nearby, either buried, stolen, or destroyed before their importance was understood. Picture a book with half its pages ripped out. That is our inheritance, a fractured message that resonates across the ages, awaiting someone to complete its meaning. Even now, following decades of research, we are left with more inquiries than resolutions. What sort of society invested the time and energy to create these carvings? Were they intended for the whole tribe, or only for initiated individuals? Were the symbols spontaneous expressions, or a part of a complex language now lost to us? And what tales perished with the elders who were never consulted? The site remains accessible to the public, albeit with restrictions. Visitors proceed quietly on a wooden walkway, their gaze sweeping the sandstone, as if anticipating the images to stir or communicate. And perhaps, in a sense, they do. There's something primal and living in those etchings, something that plucks at the periphery of thought and murmurs that there is more here than meets the eye. Some claim that if you visit at first light, when the sun strikes the stone at the perfect angle, the carvings appear to luminesce. Shadows accentuate the grooves, and the rock's surface seems to pulse. In those moments, it's easy to feel that you're not by yourself, that some being is still observing from the forest's edge, that the spirits etched in stone are still anticipating the next person who might finally understand. On the remote, wild island of Isle Royale, surrounded by the frigid expanse of Lake Superior, lies a landscape known today for its untouched wilderness and its famous moose-wolf dynamic. Yet hidden deep beneath its forested heights and stony bluffs is one of North America's most perplexing and persistent historical puzzles, the ancient copper mines. These are not the leavings of colonial industry or modern ventures, and they provoke an inescapable question. Who extracted all of this copper, and where did it all disappear? Archaeologists have long recognized that Native American cultures were mining copper in this area as far back as 5,000 to 7,000 years ago during the Archaic period. The hammerstones they wielded, smooth river rocks used to break away at the veins of pure copper, can still be found. There was no smelting or modern equipment, just raw, unadulterated copper pulled straight from the earth. This is one of the few places on the continent where metal could be utilized directly from the ground. And this activity was not confined to Isle Royale. The entire Keweenaw Peninsula, which extend from Michigan's Upper Peninsula into Lake Superior, is dotted with the remnants of these ancient operations. An estimated 10,000 prehistoric mining pits, some descending over 20 feet, are scattered throughout the region. But it isn't the quantity of pits that is so astonishing. It is the immense volume of copper that seems to have been removed. According to some calculations, ancient miners extracted more than 500,000 tons of pure copper from the area. This is a staggering figure, particularly for people equipped only with stone implements. So what happened to it? This is the riddle that has stumped researchers, historians, and explorers for generations. If one attempts to reconcile this volume of copper with what is found in known Native American archaeological sites across the continent, ceremonial objects, jewelry, tools, the numbers simply do not align. Not by a long shot. A few copper spearheads here, a ritualistic plate there, but nothing that accounts for hundreds of thousands of tons of material. It is as if the copper simply evaporated. This is where the mystery deepens. Some academics propose that the copper was traded throughout the continent, slowly spreading through extensive trade routes that reach from the Great Lakes down to the Gulf of Mexico and the American Southwest. There is compelling evidence for this. Copper artifacts from the Great Lakes have been discovered in Hopewell burial mounds in Ohio and even among the Mississippian cultures far to the south. But again, the arithmetic fails. Even when accounting for extensive trade, the majority of the mined copper remains missing. This enigma has paved the way for more radical hypotheses. One of the most enduring is the notion that an unrecognized Old World civilization, perhaps Phoenicians, Minoans, or even Egyptians, traversed the Atlantic long before Columbus, reaching the Great Lakes and exploiting its copper reserve for their own purposes. Supporters of this idea point to anomalies like petroglyphs resembling Mediterranean symbols, ancient legends that hint at visitors from across the ocean, and the sheer industrial scale of the mining, which seems difficult to attribute to the toolkit of archaic North American peoples. Of course, mainstream archaeology is profoundly skeptical. There is no conclusive proof of pre-Columbian transatlantic contact in the Copper Country. No ancient shipwrecks, no Middle Eastern tools or inscriptions. Nevertheless, the mystery gnaws at the edges of accepted history. If not Old World civilizations, then who? And why mine so much copper if it was not being accumulated or used in the vicinity? The deeper one investigates Isle Royale itself, the more fascinating it becomes. The island is incredibly isolated. Reaching it, even now, necessitates a lengthy boat or seaplane journey. Yet ancient miners undertook the voyage, transporting tools and provisions across perilous waters. Once there, they established seasonal camps and excavated through dense bedrock, often burrowing deep into the earth with little more than fire-hardened wood and stone mauls. You can still see the scorched rock where they used fire to weaken the stone before hammering it apart. In recent times, LiDAR surveys and advanced ground-penetrating radar have uncovered even more widespread networks of pits and tunnels, some of which seem to extend deeper than previously imagined. In certain places, the miners pursued narrow copper veins with surgical accuracy, as if they possessed a geological understanding that surpassed simple trial and error. And then there is the ceremonial dimension. Among the copper artifacts that have been preserved, many were not practical. They were not knives, axes, or fishing implements. They were ornamental, crafted into complex shapes like crescents and thunderbirds. These items suggest that copper was more than a mere resource. It was sacred. The metal was believed to possess power. The individuals who extracted it may have viewed themselves not just as laborers, but as spiritual conduits, drawing divine material from the bones of the earth. Some native oral histories allude to this. In Ojibwe tales, copper is regarded as a gift from the spirit realm, to be used with reverence and only in ways that honored its source. Some think that the reason so much of the copper is unaccounted for is because it was never intended for accumulation or display. It was interred, given back to the land in rituals, or simply considered too sacred for common use. But not all the stories are reverential. There are darker legends as well. Some tribes speak of an era when powerful beings or even giants mined the copper for their own use. Non-human entities that dominated the area long before people arrived. These narratives are often disregarded as mythology, but they are consistent enough across various tribal traditions to make one wonder if they could be symbolic memories of something long forgotten. Then there is the unsettling silence surrounding the cessation of the mining. At some point around 1200 BCE, the activity simply ceased. Not gradually, not in a slow taper, but abruptly. Why? There is no evidence of war or disaster, no environmental change that would have rendered the area uninhabitable. It is as if the ancient miners disappeared or were compelled to stop. What truly transpired out on Isle Royale thousands of years ago? Were these miners small, isolated groups of early Americans, patiently chipping away at copper with hand tools over centuries? Or were they part of something much larger, a lost chapter of history where civilizations rose and fell, leaving behind only the scars and the rock? The island offers few answers. Today, the old pits are cloaked in moss, the tools are rusted or buried, and the ancient campsites have dissolved into the forest. But if you walk the rocky paths near McCargo Cove or sit quietly by Minong Ridge, you can still perceive the weight of what once occurred there. The copper remains in the ground, gleaming in fractured veins, and the mystery still hangs in the air, dense and silent, like the cold breath of the lake. In the southwest corner of Michigan, the quiet town of Niles rests near the banks of the St. Joseph River. Today, it's a peaceful community known more for its small-town appeal than for any profound historical puzzles. Yet, beneath the surface of this unassuming region lie ancient earthen structures, mounds, some still whole, others long ago leveled or forgotten, that testify to a civilization far more ancient than the town itself. These mounds, built by peoples we now refer to as the Hopewell or Adena cultures, are among the most mysterious and poorly understood relics of Michigan's ancient past. They were not merely random heaps of soil. These mounds were intentionally sculpted, carefully positioned, and often imbued with spiritual or ceremonial meaning. Some served as burial sites, while others may have functioned as astronomical observatories or locations for ritual. Although the forests and fields of modern times have obliterated many of them, early descriptions from settlers and antiquarians tell of large, conical mounds emerging from the earth like primeval monuments, silent, imposing, and profoundly out of place in what is now a suburban setting. The Hopewell culture, which takes its name from a farm in Ohio where many of its artifacts were first examined, flourished from approximately 100 BCE to 500 CE. Their influence extended across the Midwest, from Illinois to New York and down into the Mississippi Valley. Niles, situated at a vital crossroads between the Great Lakes and inland river routes, would have been a perfect spot for settlement and commerce. The existence of these mounds indicates it was more than just a stopping point. It was a center, a spiritual and social nexus for a people whose complexity we are only now starting to appreciate. Early accounts from 19th century explorers and settlers detailed numerous mounds in the Niles vicinity. Some were solitary, rising 10 to 20 feet high, while others were part of intricate arrangements of circular and rectangular enclosures, elevated platforms, and precisely shaped ridges. In an era before aerial surveys or satellite technology, people were amazed by the scale and exactitude. They found it hard to believe that indigenous peoples could have fashioned something so sophisticated. This gave rise to myths. Some early Americans ascribed the mounds to a vanished race, perhaps the legendary mound builders, who were supposedly eradicated before the ancestors of modern tribes arrived. Others ventured further, proposing connections to ancient Egyptians, Phoenicians, or even the constructors of Stonehenge. These notions have since been disproven by archaeology, but they illustrate just how astonishing and impressive the structures once were. Today, only a small number of these ancient earthworks are still visible in and around Niles. Many were raised during farming, development, or road building, viewed at the time as mere Indian mounds, obstacles to be flattened or plundered. Artifacts recovered from those that were excavated included pottery, stone tools, copper jewelry, and sometimes human remains. But what is most remarkable is what these artifacts tell us about the culture itself. The Hopewell were not a primitive or secluded people. They were part of a vast, interconnected network of trade and ritual that spanned the eastern half of North America. Materials discovered in their mounds originated from distant locations. Mica from the Appalachian Mountains, obsidian from the Rockies, seashells from the Gulf of Mexico, and copper from the Lake Superior region. These were not just commodities. They were sacred items, transported over long distances and placed with reverence in mounds like those in Niles. This points to a civilization that prized ceremony as much as it did survival. And what a mound's architecture! Some are aligned with solar phenomena, solstices, equinoxes, and lunar cycles. This suggests a profound knowledge of astronomy and timekeeping, likely intertwined with religious practices. At some sites across the Midwest, mounds were arranged to mirror constellations, such as the Pleiades or Orion. It is not known if the Nile's mounds followed this celestial pattern, but given their cultural context, it is highly probable. One particularly unsettling detail mentioned in older accounts is that some of the Nile's mounds housed multiple burials, often added in layers over time. In certain instances, the deceased were interred with elaborate grave goods, pipes, ornaments, or effigies. In others, the remains were cremated and placed in urns. It is thought that these were not ordinary burials, but rather ceremonies for spiritual leaders, warriors, or individuals who held significant roles in the community. But there is another facet to the mystery. Many Native American oral traditions, especially among the Potawatomi and Ojibwe, refer to the mounds not just as burial places, but as centers of power. According to these narratives, the mounds were constructed where the Earth's energy was most concentrated, at natural intersections of spiritual force. Some tribes believed the spirits of their ancestors still lingered in these locations, safeguarding the land and guiding the living. Others cautioned against disturbing the mounds, warning that it could lead to misfortune or sickness. In this light, the demolition of the Nile's mounds is more than just a historical tragedy. It is a spiritual obliteration, an erasure of sacred geometry and ancestral memory. And yet, the land remembers. Residents in certain areas of Niles have long reported strange occurrences in places that once contained large mounds. Unexplained lights in the woods, the sensation of being watched, peculiar animal behavior, and even dreams filled with visions of fire, stone, and shadowy figures. Of course, not all mysteries are supernatural. Some are archaeological. In the 1990s, a local movement began to re-examine some of the area's forgotten sites. Old maps were retrieved from archives, soil samples were analyzed, and community members started to grasp just how much had been lost and how much might still lie beneath the ground. Ground-penetrating radar surveys in adjacent areas have detected anomalies, subtle elevations, buried ditches, and circular depressions. These could be the remnants of mounds, lodges, or ceremonial rings, their forms just waiting to be rediscovered. There is also speculation that a much larger mound complex once stood along the St. Joseph River, possibly a regional ceremonial hub comparable to Ohio's Newark Earthworks or Illinois' Cahokia. If this is true, it would completely reshape Niles's position in North American prehistory, transforming it from a mere footnote into a focal point. For the time being, the surviving mounds are protected, though many are unmarked or uncelebrated. A few rest quietly in public parks, their importance unknown to passing joggers and dog walkers. Others are concealed in wooded areas, remembered only by local historians and elders. But they remain silent, ancient, and watchful. If you stand near one of these forgotten mounds as the sun sets, when the air turns cool and the light falls low, you might feel a stirring. Not fear, precisely, but awe, the kind that arises when you realize you are walking on ground that once hosted ceremonies, prayers, and the remains of those long departed. The past is not dead in Niles. It is merely buried, waiting patiently for someone to listen. High above the brilliant blue waters of Lake Michigan, where the coast rises into immense sand hills, lies a landscape imbued with both stunning beauty and deep, ancient sadness. The Sleeping Bear Dunes are not simply a geological wonder. They are the stage for one of the most moving Native American legends, passed down through the generations. For those who know the tale, the rolling dunes are not just sand. They are memory, devotion, and sorrow, shaped over millennia by wind, time, and tears. The legend originates far across the lake, in what is now Wisconsin, where a massive forest fire once swept through the territory of a mother bear and her two cubs. As the blaze consumed the woods, the mother bear hurried her young to the water's edge. With no time to spare and no other escape, she plunged into the vastness of Lake Michigan, her cubs paddling closely behind her. The swim was arduous and unforgiving. The waves swelled high, and the cold chilled their limbs, pulling at their fur. Yet, the mother bear pushed on, propelled by a force greater than her fatigue, her love for her children and her resolve to save them. She finally reached the opposite shore, climbing a steep dune to rest, breathless and drenched. She scanned the horizon for the small heads of her cubs. She waited as the sun journeyed across the sky. She waited as the wind changed and the clouds gathered. But her cubs did not appear. The mother bear settled into the sand, grief-stricken, her gaze locked on the lake. Days turned into moons, and moons into years, and she never stirred. In time, the Great Spirit, moved by her sorrow, transformed her body into a great dune, so she could forever keep watch over the water where she last saw her cubs. But the story does not conclude there. Touched by the mother's unwavering love, the Great Spirit formed two islands, North and South Manitou, just off the shore. These, it is said, are her cubs, honored and memorialized, preserved as a part of the land itself. Together, the sleeping bear and her offspring create a sacred trinity, etched into the geography of the Michigan coastline and, even more profoundly, into the hearts of those who hear their story. From a scientific perspective, the creation of the dunes is well documented. Thousands of years ago, glaciers carved and reshaped the land, depositing vast quantities of sand, gravel, and clay. As the ice receded, winds lifted the sand and piled it into the massive hills we see today. The landscape is in constant flux. Even now, the dunes shift several feet each year. But science, for all its accuracy, cannot account for why these dunes feel so alive, so poignant, or why visitors feel a compulsion to speak in hushed tones when they reach the summit and gaze out over the lake. The Sleeping Bear Dunes legend is an Anishinaabe tradition, narrated and re-narrated by the Ojibwe and Odawa peoples. Yet, like many indigenous stories, it operates on several levels. It is not solely about love or grief. It is a teaching narrative, a reminder of endurance, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her child. It also connects the people to the land in a profoundly spiritual manner. The story is not just located in the landscape. It is the landscape, a concept that Western thought often fails to grasp. In Native cosmology, geography, and narrative are one. There is another layer as well, one of warning and reverence. The mother bear's vigil serves as a reminder that nature remembers, that the earth carries its losses just as humans do. For Native communities, the dunes are not merely a tourist destination. They are sacred ground. And the legend is a living account, not a myth confined to a museum. It evolves, breathes, and continues to impart wisdom to those who are open to it. But as tourism expanded in the 20th century, the spiritual significance of the dunes was often disregarded. The establishment of the Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore in 1970 provided protection for the area, but also attracted large crowds. People ascend the dunes, race down the sandy inclines, and have picnics on the bluffs, frequently unaware of the deeper meaning beneath them. To address this, local tribal elders have collaborated with park authorities to incorporate Anishinaabe perspectives into signs, programs, and storytelling sessions. It is a gradual process, but one that helps reconnect the land to its original voice. Even so, some areas are intentionally left undisturbed. Certain dunes are considered so sacred that tribal members request they not be climbed. Ceremonies are sometimes conducted in secluded groves, often featuring songs and offerings intended to honor the sleeping bear and her cubs. These are not performances. They are spiritual acts rooted in a worldview where animals, people, and the land are deeply interconnected. And then there is the atmosphere of the place itself. Anyone who has walked the dunes near twilight understands the uncanny silence that settles there. The wind whispers, as if speaking a language just beyond comprehension. The sand shifts underfoot in a way that feels strangely sentient. There's a distinct impression of being watched, not by other people, but by the land itself. It is not menacing. It is more like a presence, a quiet observer that recalls everything. The legend has also fueled the creativity of generations of artists, writers, and visionaries. From paintings to poems, the image of the grieving mother bear has become a symbol of enduring love. Some say that on certain nights when the moonlight is just so, you can discern the form of a bear in the dunes, not just in the broad contours of the hill, but in the shadows and textures, the curve of a back, the angle of a muzzle, the exhalation of a breath held for millennia. There are those who report seeing more: a glowing shape at the peak of the highest dune, strange tracks where none should be, or sounds that resemble the soft growl of a bear's cry, too deep and prolonged to be anything else. Whether these are illusions of the mind or echoes from another realm, no one can say with certainty, but the stories endure. Ultimately, what makes the legend of the Sleeping Bear Dunes so compelling is not just the narrative itself, but the way the story inhabits the land. You do not need to accept every detail to feel its power. You only have to stand there at the crest of that sandy hill, with the wind on your face and the lake stretching to infinity, and imagine a mother bear staring out across the water, forever waiting. That is the magic of ancient stories. They transform landscapes into memory. They keep the past alive in the present. And they remind us that not all love finds its reunion, but some love becomes eternal, carved into stone, shaped into sand, and whispered through generations by the very earth itself. Beneath the cold, green-blue depths of Grand Traverse Bay, off the northern coast of Michigan's Lower Peninsula, lies an enigma that has confounded divers, scientists, and spiritual explorers. Found in 2007 during a standard underwater archaeological scan, a line of massive stones, some with a weight of hundreds of pounds, rests on the lake floor in a configuration that appears far too intentional to be a work of nature. But what truly captivated the community of mystery enthusiasts was the finding of a specific boulder bearing what looks to be a carving of a mastodon. If genuine, this single engraving could revolutionize our understanding of human history in this part of the world. Let's begin with the arrangement itself. Lying approximately 40 feet below the surface, the stones are positioned in a linear course that extends for dozens of feet along the lake bed. Divers have described it as a kind of submerged road or wall. The stones are of a similar size and are spaced with a regularity that seems to defy random chance or glacial action. In fact, their alignment is eerily exact, almost as if they were placed as a ceremonial path or a calendar marker. Underwater archaeologist Dr. Mark Hawley, who was in charge of the team that found the formation, was employing sonar to search for shipwrecks when the image of the stone line first materialized. They had anticipated finding wood or steel. Instead, they discovered something that looked ancient, something that had no business being there. And then came the mastodon. One of the boulders in the alignment has markings, distinct grooves etched into its surface. To the casual observer, they might look like mere scratches or the effects of centuries underwater. But upon close examination, a pattern emerges, the unmistakable silhouette of an animal with a long trunk, curved tusks, and a humped back. A mastodon, an extinct Ice Age creature that inhabited North America over 10,000 years ago. If this carving is authentic, and that remains a significant uncertainty, it implies that humans were in Michigan much earlier than traditionally accepted. To have witnessed a mastodon, let alone carved its image, the artist would have had to be in the region before the conclusion of the last Ice Age. This pushes back the timeline of human settlement by thousands of years and opens up a flood of other questions. Who were these people? Why did they create this carving? And what was the function of the entire stone arrangement? Mainstream archaeologists have been cautious in their approach to the site. Some contend that the mastodon carving could be a coincidence, natural marks interpreted as art by hopeful observers. Others suggest the alignment might be the result of glacial forces, not human intervention. But the spacing and orientation of the stones seem to contradict that explanation, and the location lends credibility to the mystery. You see, around 10,000 years ago, much of Michigan was not covered by water, but was land. The glaciers had only recently withdrawn, and what is now Lake Michigan was a much smaller body of water. Areas like Grand Traverse Bay would have been dry or swampy terrain, an ideal habitat for migrating animals and the people who hunted them. If early hunter-gatherers lived in this landscape, they would have needed methods to direct animal migrations, define territories, or perform rituals. The stone alignment could have fulfilled any or all of these roles. One theory that is quietly gaining support is that the site was a drive lane, a technique used by ancient hunters to channel large animals into kill sites. The massive stones might have created natural barriers, guiding mastodons or other megafauna toward a waiting hunting party. If this theory is correct, it could be one of the oldest known hunting structures in North America, a monumental discovery. But not everyone views the formation as purely functional. Some believe it was ceremonial, perhaps a sacred place aligned with celestial phenomena. Indigenous traditions throughout North America often speak of sacred stone pathways, medicine wheels, and other earthworks used for tracking stars or communing with spiritual realms. Could this underwater alignment be Michigan's own version of Stonehenge? Not in its scale, perhaps, but possibly in its intent. To date, no major excavation has been undertaken. The site is still largely unexamined, partly because of its underwater location and partly due to the sensitive politics surrounding such finds. There is a reluctance among official bodies to declare the site man-made without irrefutable evidence. But among local tribes, there is a growing interest. The Odawa and Ojibwe communities have oral traditions that tell of a time before the lakes, a time when the land stretched far and wide, and great beasts walked alongside humans. Elders speak of sacred places that were submerged when the waters rose, and of ancient knowledge now concealed beneath the waves. Whether these stories directly allude to the Grand Traverse Bay site is uncertain, but the connection is hard to ignore. What adds another strange dimension to the tale is how quietly this discovery has been managed. Unlike other archaeological finds that generate headlines and media excitement, the underwater stones have remained largely in the shadows, discussed in niche forums and whispered about by history enthusiasts, but never truly brought into the spotlight. Why? Some suggest it is prudence, a commitment to scientific integrity while awaiting more data. Others believe it is political, with officials hesitant to disturb a potentially sacred site or ignite controversy. But there is also a theory whispered among fringe researchers that something more is being concealed, that the formation might connect to a much older, forgotten chapter of human history that mainstream institutions are not prepared to accept. Those who have been to the site describe it as deeply unsettling. Divers talk of an unnatural calm in the water, of a presence that seems to watch. Sonar equipment sometimes fails near the stones. Cameras have occasionally captured strange flashes or distortions of light. Nothing definitive, but just enough to make one wonder. And then there are the dreams. Several divers, including seasoned professionals, have reported having vivid dreams after visiting the site. Dreams of vast herds of shaggy animals, of towering figures moving through mist, of firelight flickering on stone altars under a sky thick with stars. One diver even claimed to have seen a massive handprint embedded in the lake bed, pressed into the mud like a fossilized echo. All of it could be coincidence, imagination fueled by the weight of the mystery. Or it could be something more, a sign that the land, even beneath the water, still holds memory. For now, the stones remain submerged, undisturbed, as they have for thousands of years. Divers still visit, researchers still speculate, and a mastodon carving, if that is indeed what it is, still gazes silently from its resting place in the dark. The lake holds its secrets, but the alignment of those stones, straight as an arrow beneath the sediment, feels like a message, a forgotten page in the story of this continent. And if we ever succeed in reading it, we may discover that our history is far more ancient and far stranger than we ever conceived. In the heart of Michigan's Berrien County, nestled within the rolling woodlands of Yankee Springs Recreation Area, lies a curious and unsettling geological formation known as the Devil's Soup Bowl. On the surface, it's a quiet natural depression, a steep circular pit surrounded by dense forest echoing with bird calls and the rustle of leaves. But locals know better than to see it as just a quirky landform. For generations, this place has been whispered about in low tones, draped in stories of spirits, strange phenomena, and ancient power. The Devil's Soup Bowl isn't massive by geological standards, but it's dramatic enough to make you pause. From the ridge, the ground seems to fall away suddenly, forming a deep V-shaped crater roughly 60 feet deep and over 100 feet across. Trails wind around and down into the depression where silence thickens and the air feels just a little heavier. Some say compasses spin strangely near the center. Others swear they hear voices faint, undecipherable, especially at dusk. Geologists will tell you it's a glacial kettle formed during the last ice age when a massive chunk of ice broke off from a retreating glacier and got buried in sediment. When the ice finally melted, it left behind the empty bowl we see today. Perfectly natural, perfectly explainable. And yet, people who walk into the Devil's Soup Bowl often come out feeling like they've stepped into something far older, far stranger, and far less explainable. Local Native American legends predate any geological explanations by centuries. To the Potawatomi people who once called this area home, the land was alive with spiritual energy. Some places nurturing and sacred, others dark and volatile. The Devil's Soup Bowl was seen not just as a natural feature, but as a threshold, a kind of spiritual sinkhole where energies pulled and lingered. It was a place of caution, not forbidden, but never approached lightly. One tale speaks of a powerful spirit banished from the earth who fell into the land and left a great hollow behind. Another tells of a battle between sky beings and underworld creatures, their conflict tearing the land and forming the depression. Some believe the bowl is a place where the veil between worlds is thin, a location where dreams can take shape and nightmares can echo back. Even settlers in the 1800s picked up on the unease. Early journals and letters mentioned the area with a kind of nervous fascination. Hunters claimed their dogs refused to go near the bowl's edge. Trappers swore that animals vanished there. No tracks, no blood, just absence. One infamous account tells of a man who descended into the bowl alone and was found the next morning, dazed and unable to speak, staring blankly at the treetops. He recovered eventually, but refused to ever return. By the mid-20th century, the Devil's Soup Bowl had become a hot spot for local daredevils and thrill-seekers. Teens would sneak out at night to spend time in the bowl, hoping to see something strange or prove their courage by simply sitting alone in the center. What they often got instead was disorientation, sudden nausea, or a bone-deep chill that didn't match the weather. Some described the ground as vibrating, subtly but constantly, like it was alive beneath their feet. There have also been stories of lights, blue and white orbs drifting along the ridge, sometimes darting through the trees without making sound. Hikers report the sensation of being followed, even when alone. Cameras glitch, phones lose signal, and the forest, usually filled with life, falls eerily silent the deeper you go. One of the most chilling local legends involved a man named Elias Carter, a reclusive farmer from the 1890s. Elias lived a few miles from the bowl and was known for his obsession with sky patterns, which many believe were early attempts to track stars or celestial events. He vanished without a trace one autumn night, leaving behind strange symbols carved into the wooden walls of his barn. Circles within circles, spirals, and what some describe as a figure falling into a pit. Years later, hikers found the same symbols etched into a tree near the soup bowl's edge. Another story, more recent, tells of a group of campers who pitched tents near the bowl one summer. Sometime after midnight, they heard what they described as a low, rhythmic drumming, accompanied by flashes of light from the treetops. Thinking it was other campers playing tricks, they ventured toward the sound only to find nothing. No people, no firelight, just the woods still and cold. The next morning, their footprints, hundreds of them, were gone, like the earth had swallowed their presence. Skeptics argue that the stories are just campfire fodder, born from the area's naturally eerie ambience. And sure, the acoustics within the bowl are strange. Sounds bounce oddly, making a whisper from the rim sound like it's right behind you. Mists settle easily in the depression, giving it an otherworldly look. And the surrounding woods are thick enough to play tricks on the eyes. But even skeptics agree something about the place just feels off. Then there's the matter of the dreams. Multiple people who visited the bowl have reported strangely vivid dreams afterward, often recurring. In them, the forest appears darker than it really is, and the bowl glows faintly like a moonlit crater. Some dream of descending into it and finding structures, stone altars, staircases, or doors leading underground. One woman, who visited only once and never returned, said she dreams of standing at the bowl's center, unable to move, while faceless figures ring the ridge above, watching in silence. Of course, there's no proof, no hard evidence, just story after story, layered over time like the leaves that line the forest floor. But sometimes mystery doesn't need proof. It just needs presence, and the Devil's Soup Bowl has that in abundance. Today, the site is a curious blend of hiking trail, geological exhibit, and local legend. Families picnic on the outer ridges. Park signs give the scientific explanation, but those who know the older stories walk a little slower near the edge. They listen to the wind. They glance back more often than usual. Some believe the bowl is merely sleeping, that the energy within it is dormant, waiting. Others think it's already active, whispering to those sensitive enough to hear. Whatever the truth, the Devil's Soup Bowl remains one of Michigan's strangest, most compelling ancient mysteries, a place where geology and folklore collide, where science draws the outline, but story fills in the color. And when the sun sets, casting long shadows over the rim, the bowl lives up to its name. It doesn't roar, it doesn't scream. It waits, patient and quiet, like it remembers something the rest of us forgot. Deep within the wooded expanses of Allegan County, situated between meandering rural lanes and shadowy pine groves, lies a little-known puzzle that has intrigued fringe archaeologists, local narrators, and spiritual explorers for decades. Referred to only in hushed circles as the Michigan megaliths, these enigmatic stone configurations have never captured headlines or attracted large groups of people. Yet, for those aware of their existence, they pose a stunning question. Were ancient people in Michigan constructing massive stone structures in deliberate, aligned patterns long before recorded history suggests they had such a capability? Unlike the renowned megaliths of Europe, Stonehenge in England, Karnak in France, or the dolmens of the Mediterranean, the purported Michigan megaliths are inconspicuous. They do not loom overhead in wide-open fields. Instead, they are low-lying, partially buried, and dispersed across forested clearings and ridgelines. This subtlety makes them easy to miss and even easier to write off. But individuals who have investigated them assert that they are not haphazard, not glacial leftovers, and not natural formations. The initial clues to these mysterious structures came to light in the 1980s, when hikers and amateur archaeologists in Allegan County started to observe unusually positioned stone clusters deep in the woods, often distant from any known paths, settlements, or modern development. Some were in linear patterns, others circular. Many featured stones that seemed to have been shaped or set with purpose, balanced, stacked, or oriented in ways that nature alone could not account for. At one location, a series of large boulders, each nearly uniform in size, extends for several hundred feet, oriented almost perfectly north-south. At another, a ring of stones creates a nearly flawless circle with a larger, flat-topped stone at its center. Even more fascinating, some stones appear to align with celestial phenomena, equinoxes, solstices, and moonrise positions. This precision is not random. These alignments indicate a knowledge of astronomy, a profound and ancient kind of wisdom passed down through generations. But here is the crux of the matter. No one knows who erected them. Official archaeological records in Michigan do not recognize these sites as authentic prehistoric structures. They are not safeguarded. They are not researched. In fact, most are entirely unrecorded, known only through oral tradition, cryptic map notations, and the occasional indistinct photograph shared on the internet. Some of the sites have been partly broken up by time, weather, or inquisitive visitors. Others have been obscured by forest regeneration or residential construction, disappearing back into the terrain. Still, the legend endures. And for those who have spent time near the stones, camping, meditating, charting them, there's a collective sense of a presence, a feeling that someone or something once used these places for sacred or ceremonial ends. Some report an almost magnetic attraction to the central stones. Others mention unusual animal behavior in the vicinity, deer that stop and stare, birds that seem to avoid the area altogether. A few talk of having vivid dreams or experiencing strange synchronicities after a visit. This is not scientific evidence, to be sure, but it is certainly a collection of experiences that leaves an impression. Among the most closely examined of these sites is a location known to locals as the Ridge Circle. Concealed near a ridgeline east of the Allegan State Game Area, the circle itself is understated, about 30 feet in diameter, composed of medium-sized stones that have been worn smooth by age. But when observed from above with drone technology or LiDAR scanning, the symmetry is clear. The stones are not placed randomly. They form a nearly perfect ring. Some are embedded deep in the earth, as if they have been sitting undisturbed for millennia. At the center is a broad, flat stone, approximately 5 feet across, covered in moss and slightly elevated. It looks like an altar, though it bears no carvings or inscriptions, just its form, its prominence, and the uncanny silence that envelopes it. Visitors who have spent nights near the Ridge Circle speak of a profound stillness. No crickets, no wind. Some mention electronic devices failing unexpectedly, phones going dead even with a full charge. A few have attempted to use dowsing rods or EMF meters, claiming to get elevated readings within the ring. Again, this is not mainstream science, but it contributes to a compelling picture. Something is different here. Then there's the matter of oral tradition. Although mainstream academia does not link the Michigan megaliths to indigenous history, some Anishinaabe elders speak of stone places in the deep woods, sites of power, memory, and spiritual passage. Stories tell of ancestors placing stones to mark journeys, track the heavens, or communicate with the spirits of the land. According to these traditions, the earth itself communicates through such arrangements, aligning stone with energy, time, and intent. One elder shared a story of singing stones discovered in the forest, boulders that would hum or vibrate under specific conditions, particularly during solstice. Whether literal or metaphorical, these tales suggest the stones were not just markers. They were active participants in rituals, alive in a way we no longer comprehend. But if these were sacred indigenous sites, why the secrecy? Why is there no widespread cultural memory? The answer, regrettably, may lie in suppression. Throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, native spiritual practices were systematically forbidden, and sacred sites were desecrated or disregarded. Much of the knowledge was forced underground, preserved only in fragments, and protected by silence. Of course, not everyone is convinced these structures are ancient. Some maintain that the megaliths are merely old fieldstones relocated by farmers in the 1800s. Michigan's glacial past left behind countless rocks and boulders, many of which were moved by early settlers. And that is a valid point, but again, it is the precision and alignment that set these apart. Clearing a field does not result in stone circles aligned with solar events. It does not produce straight rows that extend for hundreds of feet across uneven forest terrain. Then there are the skeptics who think the mystery is modern folklore, urban legends fueled by overactive imaginations, and internet forums. To them, the Michigan megaliths are a product of pareidolia, wishful thinking, and the human inclination to find patterns in randomness. But what if they are not? What if, scattered throughout the forests of Allegan County, there truly are the remnants of a long-lost sacred landscape, older than we realize, deeper than we acknowledge? What if the people who built them were not primitive at all, but were attuned to a worldview that saw the earth as alive, the stars as teachers, and stone as memory made solid? That possibility lingers in the quiet moments when the woods fall still and the last rays of daylight cast long shadows over moss-covered stone. If you were to stumble upon one of these formations, perhaps by chance, perhaps not, you might not feel anything immediately. But as you stand there, you will sense a strange kind of gravity, not just physical, but emotional, as if you were being observed or welcomed or remembered.